Education Environmental Department from the Waterloo Region District School Board in opening up a couple of our honey hives here at Blair Outdoor Education Centre. And today, supporting us is beekeeper Nathan, and behind the camera and behind the scenes, we have outdoor education specialist Levi Moore, Sean McCammon, Al Woodhouse, and tech support from David Pope. And we're very excited to be offering you this live glimpse into the world of bees. And at this time, I just want to point out that we're all going to be wearing masks and maintaining a social distancing, safe distance of 6 feet. So at this time, I'm going to hand things over to beekeeper Nathan.
Hello everybody, Nathan Mancy here. Welcome to Blair Outdoor Education Centre. I'm very fortunate to work here at the Outdoor Education Centre for the Waterloo Region District School Board. And we want to say thank you to TD, Friends of the Environment Foundation, for providing the grant, the funding needed for us to purchase these flow hives 2 years ago. Now, I want to tell you about another initiative that we're doing. It's called Monarch Madness. It's a citizen science project, and we need help from students and families to locate butterflies and milkweed across our region. So I think one of our tech support is going to paste the link into the chat right now, so you can check out the website for Monarch Madness. So without further ado, let's get started discussing what we have here. We've got 3 bee colonies, and these are a newer colony design manufactured by Flow Hive in Australia. This is their original invention. And the advantage of a flow hive over some of the more traditional hives is that in order to harvest the honey, you don't actually have to disturb the colony. So I'm going to show you what it looks like inside the flow hive here. And they come with these great little windows so that you can check to see if the top of your flow hive is full of honey. Now, this beehive has several parts. So the hive that you're seeing right now has 2 boxes down here. These are called brood boxes. And here in Canada, it's recommended to use 2 brood boxes so that the bees have enough room to store even more honey through the winter. Our more southerly neighbors, they can get away with only 1 brood box because their winters are not quite so severe, and so the bees may not need quite as much honey stored up. So everything that's happening in these 2 boxes is for the bees. So any honey or resources stored up down here, the bees are going to keep that, and it is not for us people. This is called the honey super, and this box goes on top, and you might be able to see this white piece of plastic, and when we open it up, you'll be able to see what it looks like. This white piece of plastic is called a queen excluder. So I'd be interested to know, anybody can paste this in the chat or type in the chat, why do you think it would be helpful for us to keep the queen below the honey super so that she can't get into the place where we're going to harvest honey? So I'll be interested to know what everybody thinks about that. Feel free to post your answers into the chat. Why do we want to keep the queen bee below the honey super? Now, looking in here, we see the Honeycomb Pattern, and this is part of the flow hive design. So they're vertical plastic honeycomb channels, and when this hive is full, when the honey super is full of honey, we would open up the batch. There's a piece that comes off, and I would take out one of these plugs and put in 6 tubes. Each of these frames is a separate frame that would be full of honey. Now, right now in the month of June, we do not have a full honey super, but later on in the summer, we're expecting this one to be full of honey. And I would turn a crank that would cause those hexagonal honeycombs to change into vertical channels, and the honey would drip down out of the tubes into our harvesting bucket or jars. So that's the flow hive, and it makes things a little bit less invasive for the bees, and it's a lot easier for us beekeepers as well. So I'm going to ask tech support, do we have any answers on that question about keeping the queen down below in the brood boxes?
We do not as of yet.
All right, so we're going to keep our eyes on the chat for that. And I want to pass it over to Joe to tell us about the next thing.
Okay, well, we're going to get ready to open up the hive. And my name is Joe Bell. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Joe Bell. I'm a system administrator with the Waterloo Region District School Board, and I have the pleasure and the opportunity to work alongside the outdoor and environmental education team on all the great projects they're doing. And this spring has been a special spring in recent memory for me, and that is I've actually become a bit of an apprentice to our beekeepers, Nathan and Sean. And I've been learning a great deal about beekeeping, and many of the questions that some of you will have today and many of the answers that will be supplied are probably some of the same questions I had this spring that Nathan and Sean have helped me with. And as I've come alongside them this spring to help the bees stay healthy and to check on the bees, I've been learning lots. And Nathan is probably going to have me start what is called the smoker very soon.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
And I'm going to hold the smoker up there so you can see it. And this is what you probably see many beekeepers doing. And as I start to light the smoker, we're going to have Nathan explain to you how does this impact the bees? Is this really bad for the bees? And how did they react to it? And why are we going to have the smoker on hand? Beekeeper Nathan?
Fantastic. So the smoker is a really great tool. We are going to puff some smoke around the entrance of the beehive, and the smoke does two things. So when that smoke goes along the entrance of the beehive there, some of the bees that are hanging out, you can see they're sort of stationed on guard. Those guard bees have a job, which is to alert the rest of the colony if there's a threat. So if there's an animal, say a bear trying to raid their honey, or maybe a beekeeper trying to raid their honey, those guard bees would make a chemical signal to warn the other bees that it's time to go into a defense mode, and the bees would kind of come out and maybe be prepared to sting in order to defend their honey stores. So when we smoke them, the smoke interferes with the chemical signal so that the other bees can't smell it, and so they don't get the message that there's interference or a disturbance in their hive. The other reason is that when the bees smell the smoke, they have an adaptation which causes them to think that perhaps a forest fire is approaching, that something out in nature is on fire, and that there's the potential for their bee colony to burn. So the bees, of course, they can fly, but they can't bring their honey with them, at least not all of it. So when they smell that smoke, they start to go into the hive and they start to eat as much honey as they can. And then they get very calm and lazy, which is a little bit different from the way my kids behave when they eat as much honey as they can. But they get nice full bellies, and they're a little bit calm for us to look at. June is a great time of year to open up the beehives. They do not have their full honey stores ready for winter yet, and so they're more focused on collecting nectar and pollen and a little bit less defensive. Later in the year, say in September, the bees would be much more reactive and probably become a little bit more aggressive as compared to the spring. I'm wondering if we have any responses or questions, Dave?
We have some questions.
Great.
So from ZL, do honeybees poop?
Great question. Do honeybees poop? Yes, of course they do poop. And I've got a couple of fun facts about that. They always go outside of the hive to do their business, and they're very hygienic, so they keep the inside of the hive clean. Sometimes if a bee dies inside, other worker bees will drag that bee carcass out, and so it's fun to see the bees actually carrying fallen soldier bee out the entrance to keep the inside clean. Even in winter, if the bees need to poop, they're going to do a really quick 5-second fly out of the hive, do their thing, and then go back inside to keep it clean. Next question.
From HB, how do they make a queen, and what is their job?
Oh, very good question.
Can you repeat the question?
Question about the queen. So the question is, how do the bees make a queen, and what is their job? So two of these hives, these two hives over here, lost their queen sometime in the month of May. And in order to make a new queen, the worker bees take some of the existing worker bee larvae and they give them some special treatment and use some special chemicals that change the metamorphosis that they're going into. And so those pupa actually turn into queen pupa, and they are much larger. The cells holding them are much larger. And we have a photo up on Twitter right now that shows a picture of 3 queen cells, and they're much larger than the other cells. Once the first queen emerges, she walks around the honeycomb looking for other queen cells, and she sticks her stinger in to those cells and kills those pupa before they can emerge. Now the queen bee is the only bee who can sting without dying, and she makes sure that she's going to reign supreme, and that helps keep the organization of the hive with just one queen. So her job is to lay eggs, and the other bees take care of her. So after she's mated, she spends her time walking around on the surface of the honeycomb, sticking her abdomen. The end of her abdomen has an ovipositor, or an egg putter, and she uses that ovipositor to put those eggs into each cell. So we're going to open up the hive.
Okay, Beekeeper Nathan, I think all our viewers are getting excited about to see what the hive is.
Yeah, we better get to it.
And we're going to get to it. So I think Beekeeper Nathan has a special tool that actually helps break off some of the sealing wax that the bees seal their hive with.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to use this beekeeper's pry bar here, because the bees seal all of the cracks. And one of the reasons is there are other insects and other creatures that like to steal honey. And so they work very hard to keep their hive sealed. So you'll see us prying things apart a little bit. Now, I'll show you what these flow frames look like. Once again, this is where the honey is stored. And since we haven't had any responses to the question about keeping the queen in the brood boxes, I'll tell you a little bit more about why we do that. Sorry, bees. So here we've got worker bees. The queen bee is so large that she doesn't fit through the holes in the queen excluder. And that's because when we harvest honey, we try to minimize the number of bee bits that are in our honey. So we don't want to have any squished up larvae or pupa or eggs in the honey that we eat. And so when we keep the honey super on top, accessible only to worker bees, that helps ensure that the queen cannot lay any eggs in these cells. So looking at these cells right here, you can see that the bees have been coating the plastic of the flow frame with their beeswax to complete the cells, and they've been putting nectar into those cells. Now, I think we may have had a question about honey. Can you let us know who asked a question about making honey?
That was from JH. How do bees make their honey?
Great. So JH asked, how do bees make their honey? Bees, as many of you probably know, spend their time, forager bees go out to flowers and collect nectar in their stomachs. So they drink nectar from flowers, it goes into their stomach, and then they come to the entrance of the hive and they pass it on to a hive bee. And so a hive bee is one that stays in the hive, in the colony, and doesn't go out to flowers. So the honey that you eat has already been in the stomach of at least 2 bees. But that's essential to the honey making process. The enzymes in the stomach of the bee are part of what makes the honey honey. So nectar is about 20% sugar, depending on the flower. But honey is more like 70% sugar. And so in order to get that sugar concentration higher, the hive bees deposit it from their stomach, they regurgitate it into the cells, and then they flap their wings or vibrate their wings rapidly causing the water in the nectar to evaporate. And the bees are very good chemists. They are able to tell when the concentration is just right. And if you have honey that is pure and untouched, it doesn't go bad. It doesn't ferment because the sugar concentration and the properties of honey ensure that it will last through the winter, so that the bees are able to consume it when they need it in the winter. So I'm going to put this flow frame back into the honey super.
A couple people have asked, is there a king bee?
A very good question. In the life of a bee colony, the job of the king bee is very brief and glorious. The male bees in the hive are called drones. And the reason that drones are produced is to mate with a queen. Now, the queen only mates once, and she typically is going to fly up way high into the sky and look for other drones that are hanging out there, probably from other hives, looking for a queen. And once she mates, she comes back to her hive and begins laying eggs, and the drone, or king bee, doesn't live very long after that. So typically we don't call them a king. I'm gonna start to take off this honey super. Thank you, Joe, for getting that smoker going for us.
Yes, and beekeeper Nathan and beekeeper Sean have taught me a great deal this spring. And once we open this super up and we get to one of the brood boxes, we're going to be able to show you very clearly the difference between a drone and a working bee. Because what sticks out to me is that the drone bee is very, very large. Now, this white piece of mesh strip on top, this is called the queen extruder, and this is what beekeeper Nathan talked about. It's just they're small enough so that the worker bees can make their way through and the queen bee can't. And right now we're not harming the bees. We're going to just gently let the bees return to the hive, and you can use a very soft brush or just encourage them, but they will find their way back to the hive.
Fantastic. Well, now we're getting to some really exciting parts of our honey hive live, because this brood box here is the place where most of the bees are, and we may even be lucky and be able to find the queen.
Now, as beekeeper Nathan's doing that, I think a great question for our audience is, you could put in your estimate or a really good guess of just how many bees you think are in this hive. I think that's a great question.
All right, so let us know your estimates. How many bees in a healthy beehive?
While you're doing that, we have another question that's related.
Yes.
From AS, how do you get the bees to colonize in the hive?
That's a really good question.
So once again, that's a question from AS, and they've asked, how do you get the bees to colonize into the hive? Beekeeper Nathan?
Great question. So I'm going to hold this frame for the camera while I answer that question.
We have lots of estimates for number of bees, to say that.
Okay. So the bees may choose at some point in the spring, typically in May, if they start to run out of room in their hive, they may split in half and swarm. And this is something that beekeepers try to prevent. Because what happens is about half the bee population, all of the forager bees, which are about 3 weeks to 6 weeks old, leave the hive with the queen. And some of you may have seen a swarm of honeybees before. They typically land on a branch, and they all stand on top of each other in a big ball or mass. And what those bees are doing is they are looking for a place to colonize in the wild. And so the bees that are remaining behind in the hive, they raise a new queen and continue in that space, while the bees that have left with the queen send out worker bees to scout out a location in the wild where they might be able to start a new colony. And so they'd be looking for a hollow tree trunk or any other natural cavity, perhaps the wall in one of the outdoor education centers, and they're going to go into that space and start to build a new hive.
Is that a drone on the top there?
Now, while we zoom in on a drone in a moment, maybe tech assistant Dave can read out to us some of the estimates to beekeeper Nathan of how many bees are in a healthy beehive.
So we have anywhere from 1,000 to 50,000 to a whole lot of nines. So like many trillions.
Okay. So is there a number that sounds very close there, beekeeper Nathan?
Absolutely. Whoever said 50,000 bees is right on the money. A healthy hive typically has between 20,000 and 50,000 bees.
So let's give our audience an idea. I'm using a pointer stick to point at this, what is called a frame. And Nathan, beekeeper Nathan's holding this frame. Beekeeper Nathan, what is your best estimate as a beekeeper of how many bees are just on this frame?
Well, you're putting me on the spot there, Joe.
Yeah, that I am, beekeeper Nathan.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh,
6.
we need to find a better method to estimate than that,
All
beekeper
right,
Nathan.
estimation, right, okay. I'm gonna say there could be easily 300 bees on that frame on one side. Maybe
Okay.
another 200 on this side. And I'm just looking on this side. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to tell the queen apart from drone bees. And so the larger bees are usually drones. And you'll see some on this side. So just to finish up the answer to the question about how do we get them in there, we try to provide everything that they need. So we want to provide enough space, but not too much space. And we want to make sure that they have some sun hitting them, some sunlight to keep them warm, especially to warm them in the spring after the cold winter. And if they start to run out of space, that's when some of the bees might leave.
And the drones have big eyes.
Now, typically, in order to get a new hive, you can do one of two things. When we started this program, we didn't have any bees, and so we purchased nucleus colonies from a bee supply company. The other thing that you can do is to split a healthy hive. So at the end of the winter, coming into April, May, if you've got a larger bee population, you can effectively simulate a swarm or split the beehive in half, leaving the hive bees to raise their own queen and taking several frames away, and that's how they create nucleus hives that can be sold. And apiaries that produce lots of honey, every year they would be splitting healthy hives in order to prevent swarming, and so they can keep their bee population up.
Now, beekeeper Nathan, I would like to point to something on the frame and ask a question, because this is a popular question. If you turn that frame around to the other side, I'd like to point to a structure. What are these little round structures sticking out from the honeycomb? Is that honey, beekeeper Nathan? What is that?
Very good question. Okay, so I'd love to share a little bit about what we have in the cells here.
Oh, beekeeper Nathan, sorry, we have a bee here with pollen bags. That's a
right.
wonderful sighting.
He's got pollen baskets on his rear pair of legs, and you can see one of the hive bees is taking some of that pollen off of the bee to be put in storage. And so you can actually see them doing their job right now. So in addition to harvesting nectar, bees harvest pollen, which is an important source of protein, and they collect it with their pollen baskets on their rear legs. So we had a question about what's going on here. So this is in fact not honey, but over here this is honey. So if we look at the difference between the wax cap, this is a somewhat translucent, light colored cap, and underneath is honey. If I were to just take my tool and puncture that, you would be able to see the sticky honey dripping out. If I wasn't wearing a bee suit, I would be tempted to just lick that off the tool there. Now over here, these cells have papery caps, and here's a really good example. And that tells us that there are bees inside there developing as pupa. So we're gonna start to look on a few frames here. We're gonna try to find all of the different stages of development that bees go through. So the queen starts off laying eggs in cells, and then they hatch as larvae or little white worms, which I don't see on this frame, but we'll find a frame that has it. And then when they're ready to pupate, the cell is capped. Now these ones that are more flat and capped, those are worker bees. And these ones that are larger and rounded, those are the larger pupa of drones.
Now, beekeeper Nathan, beekeeper Sean shared with me earlier this spring that getting ready for the winter, the bees really want to trim down their population and make sure they have enough honey to feed only the bees that are essential. So, do the drones get to stick around for the winter, beekeeper Nathan?
Well, if you're a drone, unfortunately for you, you are not allowed to stick around for the winter. The drones are only needed when the queen needs to mate, and they don't contribute through the winter to the hive. They don't collect nectar in the summer, and so they just kind of suck energy from the hive. So the drone bees aren't allowed to stay.
So what beekeeper Nathan right now is doing, he's just gently prying open another frame to be able to show you all of the activity in the hive.
Now, sometimes the bees build their own comb on these frames, and sometimes they are linking together one frame with the other. They're building for their own purposes, and we beekeepers, we try to take advantage of their natural habits and adaptations. So when I take this out, we'll be able to tell if we had to break open any. There we go.
I know one of the questions I first had as an apprentice beekeeper to beekeeper Sean and beekeeper Nathan was, aren't you afraid of being stung by the bees? And what I quickly learned is, if you move slowly and you speak quietly, today we've had to speak a little louder. I'm not sure if that's, if we had a sighting of the queen there, beekeeper Nathan, or is that a long abdomen? Is that just a large drone?
I believe that's a drone.
A large drone.
Large eyes.
Okay.
Indicating it's a drone.
So we are on the lookout for the queen. But I did learn that if you move slowly and patiently with the queen, with the bees, that you can actually work in collaboration with the bees.
So, Joe, I'm going to ask if
Absolutely. What would you like me to point to, beekeeper Nathan?
if you can locate some of those little white C-shaped larvae from that distance. I'm not sure if you can see
Yes,
them.
I can.
Okay.
Right here.
So looking closely inside those cells, you should be able to see some larvae. And so
I
that's...
just tilt the frame forward a little bit. Yep, right there.
There we go. So those larvae are developing into pupa. And once they're ready to pupate, the cell is capped. And that's when it turns into an adult. And I like to tell classes that bees have to go through a process of puberty that's a lot more transformative than we humans.
How many days roughly is that, beekeeper Nathan, from the time they're laid to the time they're actually starting to look like something we would consider to be a bee?
No, that's a really great question, Joe. And we're going to have to ask our distance expert, Sean McCammon. The question is, how long is each stage of development for the bees? How many days are they a larva? How many days are they a pupa? And I can answer the question for the adult bees. They spend the first 3 weeks of their adult life as hive bees when they don't leave the hive at all, and they tend to the queen, and they receive nectar and pollen from the other bees, and they deposit it and turn it into honey. And then from the ages of 3 weeks up to 6 weeks when they die, the worker bees then are forager bees, and they go out looking for nectar and pollen in the wild.
How does the queen bee die?
How does the queen bee die? Great question. A new queen who goes on a mating flight up into the sky may not return. She might die of predation. A bird or other animal may catch and eat her. But typically in a healthy hive, the queen, once she's started to lay eggs, she usually is pretty safe. And if she's going to die, it might be in the winter. The most vulnerable time for a queen and for the hive as a whole is the winter time. And they survive through our cold Ontario winters by forming a mass of bees with the queen at the center. And if you were to open up the hive in winter, you'd be exposing the bees to very cold temperatures and possibly killing them. So we don't do that, but what you would see is a sphere or a ball of bees all walking over top of each other. And the worker bees take turns being on the outside and the inside. So they walk from the outside to the inside of the sphere, and that way they keep the temperature constant and keep the queen at the center warm enough. This requires a lot of energy, which is why they store all of this very energy-rich honey, which is, of course, the reason that we humans love to keep bees.
So AP would like to know, why are bees so important?
AP would like to know, why are bees so important? Great question, AP. Bees perform a number of essential roles in the wild. Now, these are domesticated European honeybees. There are hundreds of bee species in the world. Most of them are wild bees, and there are thousands or more of pollinating insects. And pollination is probably the most important role that bees and other pollinating insects have. And so, just to give you an idea of how important they are, we have a list, where we had a list of a partial list. Joe, can you tell us some of the things that we eat that are pollinated by bees?
Absolutely, Beekeeper Nathan, because this is amazing. You know that if you go to your grocery store and you're picking up cucumbers or beets or celery, strawberries, cherries, raspberries, pears, blueberries, grapes, sesame seed, watermelon, eggplant, tomatoes, all of these plants may have been pollinated by the honeybee. So that is why it is very important in our world today with climate change, and when you hear about pollinators and supporting pollinators with doing certain things in your garden at home, or you might even have a garden on a balcony. There's studies being conducted right now telling us that bees in New York City and in large cities are very healthy because they get to visit a wide variety of plants. They're not just collecting from one plant source. And sometimes out in the country, we use lots of chemicals and pesticides for the crops. And unfortunately, that can actually hurt the health of the honeybee. And I know that we've had a question earlier today. It was sent in, and I'm going to have tech support just read it out to me. It was about asking, can you keep bees in the city? And tech support, Dave, can we find that question?
Yes,
I think that's a great question. It's from
EG.
It's from EG, and the question is
it legal for a licensed beekeeper to keep a honeybee hive within the boundary of the city of Kitchener?
So this is very much about Kitchener. So EG is asking us, is it legal to keep for a beekeeper, a licensed beekeeper, to keep bees in the city boundaries of the city of Kitchener? And
so I can answer that question, Joe.
Our beekeeper Nathan is going to answer that question for us.
Absolutely. So the regulation in the province of Ontario is that you have to have your beehives at least 30 meters from a property line. So in the city of Kitchener, there are not many properties where you would easily have that kind of distance in a residential neighborhood. So in the country, it would be a lot easier to keep bees. There are, of course, some best practices that you can learn if you're thinking about keeping bees. We want to try to prevent mites and other diseases that affect bees, and we don't want to allow the population of mites to grow or to spread to other hives. But there's a designation called a bee city, and the cities of Kitchener, Waterloo region, and Guelph are bee cities. And this has to do with city governments protecting and planting pollinator plants.
A question from EH is, do pesticides contaminate the honey?
Excellent question. So a question from EH. Does pesticides contaminate the honey? And I'm going to turn this over to beekeeper Nathan.
It's a really great question. So as we answer that question, I'm going to point out for the camera, when I took this frame out, some of the honey cells came open because they were attached to the outside of the frame. And so you can see some of these bees using their tube-like tongues, right here to suck out the honey because they don't want to lose any honey. So they're going to store it in their stomach and then they're going to seal it back into honey cells. This is a really beautiful frame full of honey. You can see the smooth, homogeneous look. This is all honey. The bees have used this entire honeycomb for honey. There's no larva on these frames, and this is typical of the outside frames of the brood. So
And when beekeeper Nathan is talking about the outside frames to the audience, he's talking about the frames that are on the outside of the box, and this is an inside frame. Outside frame, inside frame. And I just had one point of clarification because beekeeper Nathan made a great point there. He said those bees are hard at work sucking up that honey. That's a lot of work, beekeeper Nathan. Why would they do that? Like, how much effort do these bees have to go to fill up that honey?
Well, they work very hard all through the summer and spring months in order to collect enough nectar that they will be able to survive through the winter. And they work very well as a colony. They're sort of like a super organism. So just to return to that question about insecticides, we know that insecticides do impact bees. Bee populations that are near farms where insecticides are used are more susceptible to hive collapse. But in terms of the honey that you are going to get from those bees, typically we don't have to worry about having chemical contaminants. The bees are very good at keeping that honey safe and clean.
Thank you for your question. We have one more question coming in. Tech support, Dave.
JW asks, how can we be bee friendly in our own yards?
That is a great question. So JW?
Yep.
JW is asking, how can we be bee friendly in our own backyard? Do you have any top tips, beekeeper Nathan?
Oh, that's a really great question, and this is another opportunity for me to plug our Monarch Madness initiative. The best way that you can support bees in your own property is to plant pollinator-friendly plants. And if you search online for pollinator-friendly plants, you're going to find a whole list of different things. Some of them even produce delicious fruit or berries. But these are plants that have a lot of nectar in their flowers, produce a lot of flowers overall, have pollen that the bees use. And so if you make sure to plant these flowering plants on your property, you're going to attract a number of pollinators, including honeybees and monarch butterflies. And alongside those pollinator plants, you can plant the host plant for monarchs, which is milkweed, and that gives you the opportunity to observe monarch caterpillars throughout the summer if you're able to attract them to your property.
Beekeeper Nathan, one of the questions I first asked yourself and beekeeper Sean is, how heavy are these boxes of bees? How heavy are these supers and brood boxes when we go to lift them up? Because you've had me help you, and I've been quite surprised. As time goes on, they appear to get heavier. Why is that?
That's really a great question. So while I answer that question, I'm going to start to pry off this brood box so we can take a look at the other brood box underneath. Each box may be up to 30 pounds, and so that's quite heavy. Honey is heavier by weight than water, and the honey is the heaviest thing in the beehive. So when I want to check a honey super to find out if it's full of honey or if it's not quite full yet, all I have to do is lift it off and try to figure out how heavy it is. So if it's very heavy, that's a good sign that it's close to being ready to harvest. And once I finish prying off the wax seal on this one, then I'm going to lift it up. And I expect this one to be quite heavy as well. We looked at that one frame on the outside that was completely full of honey. And the bees have been working on the honey super as well. They typically work from the inside bottom toward the outside and toward the top. So
Well-
I expect this to be mostly full.
Well, beekeeper Nathan, I don't want to bespoke, but I think beekeeper Sean has had some bee boxes weigh almost 50 pounds, he told me.
Oh my goodness.
Now maybe he's just telling me a bit of a bee story on that one.
You know what? I believe it, Joe. At Laurel Creek, outdoor educator Sean McCammon uses Langstroth hives in addition to flow hive. And the boxes on a Langstroth hive tend to be a little bit larger, which means, of course, that they can be heavier. So when it's time to harvest, from one flow hive, from the super, I could get 30 pounds of honey, and each frame might have 3 pounds of honey in it.
So can we convert that 30 pounds into maybe liters? Roughly?
or kilograms.
Or
You know,
kilograms?
it's funny because typically you'd think that we would be using a measure of volume for honey, but the standard is actually to use a measure of mass or weight. I'm going to ask tech support for a quick figure here, but to start with, I'll let you know that a healthy hive can produce approximately 100 pounds of honey in one season. So 100 pounds of honey, that would be
Like a grade 6 kid.
how many? A grade 6? Sorry?
Like a grade 6 student.
Yeah. Tell us the conversion there.
100 pounds into kilograms
100 pounds into kilograms.
is 45.35 kilograms.
45 kilograms?
Yep.
45 kilograms approximately. So that's a lot of honey. Just to give you an idea, last year was the first season that we harvested honey from one of these hives. And we only harvested once. In a really good year, we could harvest 3 times from each hive. So with one harvest, I was able to fill up a 5-gallon bucket with honey. I'm going to take one of these frames out.
Maybe cameraman Al is going to get a great picture of this glistening piece of the hive here.
So we have another question. The question is, do bees drink water, and does water pollution affect them? As far as I know, the bees get all the water that they need, all the moisture they need from the nectar and the flowers. They're already trying to get rid of water in the nectar to produce honey. Does water pollution affect bees? Bees, unlike many other insects, don't rely heavily on, at any stage of their life, on water, such as ponds and streams. So I would say that pollution of farmland from pesticides has a much bigger impact than water pollution, but that's a great question. And feel free to disagree if anybody has some more information on that one.
Beekeeper Nathan, you want me to hold one up and you can start to point and identify some things that you can find?
Yeah, sure.
The,
That's great. Let me just hand you the tool. I'll leave the tool there for you.
Can I ask a question while you're doing that?
Yes, please.
So from MA, they want to know if honeybees are dangerous to humans.
A great question, MA. Glad to hear that you're watching. Honeybees typically are not dangerous for most people. Of course, some people do have allergies, and we know a number of people who have an anaphylactic allergy to bees, and so for those people, honeybees are dangerous. But the good news is honeybees do not want to sting. Honeybees die if they sting, and the reason that is that the stinger on the end of the worker bees who sting stays in the skin of the mammal that they sting because it's barbed, kind of like a fish hook. And as the bee flies away, part of their reproductive organ and part of their digestive system stays behind with the stinger, and so they're going to die afterwards. So they don't want to sting, but they are willing to sting to protect their hive colony.
Possible queen sighting, not sure. Larger abdomen, not sure. Is that a drone? It was up there somewhere. It's a larger abdomen. I was just trying to. There's a couple walking around here that could be drones.
This frame shows a lot of cells that are capped pupa, and one of the other things that we haven't covered is that some of these cells have pollen inside, And so those would be yellow if they were uncapped.
What's that one?
That's a drone.
Drone.
Yeah.
So Beekeeper Nathan, I was asking Beekeeper Sean if this would be a good project to get into down the road when I retire. And what are your thoughts about beekeeping as a hobby or as a business, Beekeeper Nathan?
Well, Joe, that's a really great question. I have really enjoyed learning about beekeeping and keeping bees. I think it's a really great learning opportunity for students. We love doing programs with grade 4 students who are studying habitats and learning about bee ecology and how they survive in terms of their adaptations. Now, keeping bees does require some equipment and has some startup costs. And it's great when you know some people who are beekeepers who can provide a base of knowledge. So Joe, I think this would be a great activity for you to do in your retirement because it sure is a lot of fun. We do not have these hives solely for the purpose of producing honey. Typically, an apiary that's making money from selling honey would have many hives. The honey that we produce here goes to students. Each teacher takes home a container of honey at the end of our bee programs, and it's a really great way for those students to experience the sweetness of this program.
It's a very sweet program indeed, and we like to have lots of fun with all the bee puns.
Tech support wondering if you've got any more questions for us.
Yep. From JW, how are bees different than wasps?
That's a great question. So any of the narrow-waisted insects belong to a group called Hymenoptera, and honeybees are a bit different from wasps. They I'm going to ask our behind the cameraman if he can go into detail here because he's an expert on insects of all kinds. How are wasps different from bees? He's shrugging his shoulders at me. They're different species, and there are a number of
wasps have an ability to sting multiple times. That's one difference I learned the hard way.
Wasps have an ability to sting multiple times. One of the most common types of wasps that you may be familiar with around here are paper wasps, and paper wasps produce that kind of spherical, papery hive, and they're another member of the family of Hymenoptera.
So Beekeeper Nathan, I think we've come to the end of our time. Tech support, how many people did we have join in today?
We have had up to 305.
All right.
We've had over 300 people join us today, so I would really like to thank all of the viewers, and I also want to extend a thank you to everybody in the Waterloo Region District School Board who has supported outdoor education, the department this year during our current public health crisis. The team has come together and put together the bird count, a bug blitz, field trip Friday, Monarch Madness, which is going all through the summer and into September, and of course today's Honey Hive Live. And it's been a great time to celebrate the environment, to celebrate the outdoors, and it's time for us to put the bees back and let them settle down again. And I'm going to let Beekeeper Nathan have the final word today.
All right, well, thank you everybody for tuning in. Once again, I want to make sure that you're aware of our project called Monarch Madness. Monarch Madness, the link is going into the chat right now. Monarch Madness is an opportunity for you to help protect an iconic species at risk, the monarch butterfly, which is threatened because of declining milkweed, amongst other factors. And so we are taking on the project of helping to conserve the species at risk, but we need help from students and families in our school board. So we're asking throughout the summer that you keep your eyes open for monarch butterflies, for milkweed patches, and that you check out the website to download our guides on how to identify monarch eggs, larvae, and pupa, and report those sightings to our website. And we are going to be mapping out milkweed and monarch locations throughout our region. And we would like to culminate this project in the fall by selecting a number of schools to become monarch way stations. And so we'll be using those school properties as a host for pollinator plants and milkweed patches so that we can support this species at risk as it migrates. Thanks again, everybody, and I'm so glad that you were able to tune in to this Honey Hive Live at Blair Outdoor Education Centre.
Subscribe to the channel.
And please subscribe to our YouTube channel, as we are going to be continuing to produce videos to support outdoor and experiential learning.
Thank you, everyone.